The Nolan Wells mystery is off the rails right now. More madness than WNBA. And how can Christians continue to evaluate these situations in a biblical way? I have a framework. I'm going to share it with you. First, we're going to talk about the Nolan Wells investigation and what is going on there. The parents and Nolan's friends seem to be at odds right now. There are a lot of conflicting interviews going on, but still there's no evidence of foul play yet. The parents arranged an independent autopsy. What did we get from that? Nothing. We didn't get a cause of death or a manner of death. And a lot of that is because when the state conducted its autopsy, it had to remove some of the body parts from Nolan Wells. And so the independent autopsy could not be as thorough. But it's not uncommon for the medical examiner to remove certain parts of the body to test and things like that. Earlier, in this investigation, we were looking at the phone and the fact that Nolan left his phone on the boat. Now we have a lot more context for what happened. It seems that a lot of people left their phones because they were going to be kind of going in the water and they didn't want to have their phones with them. And Nolan, left his phone on the boat because he was going to be in the water. The other issue about Nolan not getting on the boat with the friends seemed a little suspicious at first, but now we know they went with a whole group of friends and there were 2 or 3 boats. And Nolan didn't want to get on that original boat he was on because it was taking on water because it had issues, and he just decided, I'm just going to get on another boat with some of our other friends. And so now those things don't seem to be as suspicious, but the parents still want answers, and they certainly deserve answers. But what has just happened is that Nolan Wells' mother, whose name is Christine, she is the executor of his estate. She's filed a subpoena, sent it to the social media companies asking for account information. Some of those companies will likely only give up that info for criminal case and investigation. But I want to show you a clip from my favorite criminal podcast, Law and Crime. This one is called Sidebar with Jesse Weber. He does some really great reporting. I encourage you to go and listen to some of his breakdowns of this case and others because he does a very thorough job of breaking down the evidence. We're going to look at a quick clip here.
So I am curious if we're getting closer to a potential lawsuit. I mentioned that, but then we have a new development. It was reported by People magazine that a preservation notice, which you just mentioned, a notice to preserve evidence, was sent by Nolan's family to the families of Nolan's friends and different investigative bodies or agencies. And one letter that was obtained says, quote, accordingly, you have an immediate legal duty to preserve all materials of all kinds within your possession, custody, or control that may be relevant in any way to the claims or defenses. This duty includes not only you, but also your family members. And according to reporting from People and ABC News, one was even sent, for example, to Ashley Cole, who's a judge whose son was reportedly with Nolan Wells that day. It seems like they might be filing a lawsuit. In what capacity, against who, and what would be the claims?
It could be a wrongful death action. Remember, when you prosecute someone for a murder or homicide, you need to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But if you are moving ahead with a lawsuit based on wrongful death or battery, you only need to prove it with a preponderance of the evidence. Is it more likely than not that it occurred?
Lower standard, yeah.
A lower standard, right? O.J. Simpson was found not guilty because the standard beyond a reasonable doubt was so high, but he was found liable for the deaths of Nicole Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Lower standard. So what the family's doing here is what they've already been doing with the independent autopsy. They don't necessarily trust what the government is doing, and so they're saying, we're going to do our own investigation, the independent autopsy, which was inconclusive, and we don't trust that there will be criminal charges filed, so we're going to do an investigation via lawsuit through private lawyers. That's where the preservation letter comes from.
So that's really the basics of that update. They sent this preservation letter to the families, parents, some of the friends, asking them to make sure they don't delete anything out of their phones or anything that could be pertinent to the investigation. And then again, I mentioned earlier that they sent a subpoena to the social media companies asking for account information related to Nolan Wells, posting, things like that. A lot of time, these social media companies will only give you that information if it's criminal, if it's coming from law enforcement and they have a criminal subpoena, um, or if a lawsuit is actually filed, which the parents haven't done yet. So we'll see if they get this information from the social media companies, but ultimately they really don't need it because metadata out of the phone. I mean, this lawyer here, I strongly agree with a lot of the things he's saying in this particular episode of Law and Crime, but the metadata will tell you what was on Nolan's phone and whether anything was deleted. So you really don't need a lot of this stuff now because you can get all of it out of the cloud. But if the parents try to file a lawsuit, what is it going to look like? It would be something like a wrongful death action. You can file that against friends or the civilians, but not law enforcement. Law enforcement has sovereign immunity. Government officials tend to have lots of immunity, whether it be from criminal prosecution or from civil cases. Okay, I know this. I've sued the government a lot of times in my work as a litigator. And so, but any lawsuit that parents try to file right now will likely be dismissed because there is no evidence of it. They don't even have a cause or manner of death right now for Nolan Wells. And so they don't have anything to bring to a court to say that anyone did anything to him. And so it's pretty premature right now. But ultimately, this lawyer goes on to say, and I 100% agree, that the parents will likely get the answers about what happened to their son from the criminal investigation, from the investigators in the state, these experts who are trained to look at this information, trained to take witness testimony, trained, to look at the autopsy results that will come from the state and decide and determine what happened. They're going to present some of that information to a grand jury. It's likely after that they will release it to the public. And many people are frustrated because the law enforcement officials will not release the answers right now. But investigators are often quiet in criminal investigations. They don't tell you what's happening for a very good reason. They need to make sure they have all their ducks in a row before they go, sharing the information. And if they do believe something criminal has taken place, they don't want to release information prematurely in case a suspect is listening to that. You don't want someone to get that information before law enforcement is ready. I do believe the state autopsy will tell us a whole lot more than that independent autopsy. And likely we will have a cause and manner of death, cause being drowning, blunt force trauma, or whatever, manner of death being accident, homicide, etc. Okay, so hopefully that state autopsy will tell us both of those things, or at least enough for us to know whether there was foul play or not. When the investigation is closed, all that will likely be released. And if the investigators determine that there was some sort of criminal act here, then they'll prosecute someone, and then people will find out, as there is a trial and the sort of preliminary hearings and things like that. But the issue with this case is just, it's so sensational right now, and people don't know anything. You just have a bunch of social media sleuths out here who are way out of their depth, who are driving way outside of their lanes, people who don't know how to conduct investigations, don't know how to vet information, have no information to vet, and are sharing, audio that isn't real, making all these determinations, talking about protecting black men in white spaces. And you all are way out of line right now. You're inciting anger and implying guilt on people without proof, and that is wrong. It doesn't matter what color these people are. You guys don't want anyone assuming things about you because you're black. Stop assuming things about people because they're white. This is a very serious situation, and it calls for experts to be looking at the evidence, not your social media little accounts, assuming that you know what's going on. So some of you have no basis for any suspicions, and you just have to wait. Let the experts do their jobs, the people who are actually trained to investigate these kinds of issues, and then we'll see what happens. But I'm hoping that these parents get answers soon, because I know they're going through a very tough time right now, having lost their son. But you all on social media, and you all aren't helping. because you don't know what happened either. And assuming you know what happened isn't going to help. It isn't going to fix anything. All right, next. So the WNBA continues its nonsense.
The WNBA fining and suspending a Seattle Storm co-owner after she allegedly cursed out two young fans, two teenagers, that were sitting courtside as they held signs thanking Sophie Cunningham for protecting women's sports. The WNBA star reacting, quote, "I truly believe there's a safe space and love for everybody. Biological girls, biological boys, trans women, and trans men. Everyone is welcome at my table. You can disagree and still be kind. Bravo to those girls for standing up for what they believe. You'll be hearing from me soon. Yay for gifts." Truly embarrassing of the co-owner. Unfortunately, shows the type of leader that she is.
So yeah, these girls, and they have a right to their opinion, and I think a lot of people have a right to believe what they believe about this trans issue and girls sports, and a lot of people agree with this position that men don't belong in this space. But I actually can't believe that this is still happening, because this is a very simple issue, but we live in a crazy time. And unfortunately, the support for a lot of these LGBTQ issues has gone down, and I think it's because the Democrats have definitely overplayed their hand on this issue. The left really coerces people to believe this. I want you to look at this. I want you to look at this poll right now, which talks about, look, the U.S. support for LGBTQ plus issues remains down from its peak. So the story highlights, this story is from June 3rd. This is from Gallup, June 3rd of this year. Support for legal same-sex marriage down 6 points from its high in 2022 and 23. 62% viewing gay lesbian relations as morals lowest since 2016. It's a long time. Perceived morality of changing one's gender down 8 points since 2021. All right. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that this has been kind of force-fed and forced down people's throats. And people don't like to be coerced on some of these issues. If you'll remember, during the last presidential election, one of Donald Trump's ads went viral. Kamala Harris in the ad is talking about providing sex change surgeries for prisoners and how the government should pay for that. And Trump, pops in and says Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. And it ended up being a very successful ad for him. And I think part of it is because people, just kind of started to back away from the coercion, from the force. And that's what's happening here in this transgender issue. Someone has to be a priority. We have to make a choice. And you have to either choose the privacy of these girls, the ability of these girls to have their own space, their own place to compete, or the emotional consideration of the men who want to be women. And I think the choice is obvious. You have to choose the girls in this issue. You must, because the space was created for them. Title IX, legally, is created to make a space for girls to compete without boys. That's it. And so you can't just allow men who want to be women to usurp that spot that was designed for biological women. And that's not controversial to say, or at least it shouldn't be. Shouldn't be controversial to say. I know a lot of people don't like it, but it is the truth. It is the reality, and it is in fact the law. Title IX was created for that reason. It was created so that girls can have a space to compete without boys. And unfortunately, we're still in this place where people think they can, threaten you and curse you out. I mean, this is a grown woman cursing out these little young girls for thanking Sophie for standing up to them. Who does that? And she owns one of the teams. So this is the mentality that we're fighting against right now. And unfortunately, we're still here, even after I would think the presidential election would have taught some of these liberals a lesson. But a lot of this is delusion. Okay. And Christians need to see this for what it is, delusion. It's, a lot of people who are not willing to accept the truth and have rejected God's position on some of these issues. And Christians, I think it's important to have a clear biblical framework for evaluating these kinds of things. And, I have been able to come up with one that I think works very well for me. And I can share some of that with you right now. There's just 4 clear pillars. Those pillars are reverence, identity, conscience, and influence. And the first thing you do as a Christian is you start with God's standards, reverence for God, fear of God. What has He already said explicitly in His word about this issue? Um, and this goes for anything, not just this, girl sports issue, but anything can be um, run through this particular uh, framework and used to evaluate it. You start with reverence, God's view on the issue. Identity is next. That means what does God say about me in this issue, and what does God say about other people in this issue? Unfortunately, this identity piece is where this issue kind of collides, because people have rejected God's identity for them, what He has decided for them, and they've decided they want to do something else or be something else. And unfortunately, we don't have that option all the time. We can't reject what God has decided and decide we're going to do something else. There's simply nothing you can do about your sex. It is what it is. You can dress how you want, you can act how you want, you can wear makeup if you want, if you're a guy, but you can't force people to call you a woman because you're never going to be one. And that's just the bottom line. The third framework is conscience. This is also important in this issue and really under the umbrella of the LGBTQ issues in general, because conscience allows you to stay informed without losing, that piece of your identity that God has asked you to keep holy and righteous, and allows you to be firm and not manipulated. So right now, particularly on this issue, a lot of people have manipulated the concept of compassion and emotion, and say that if you really want to be a nice person, you have to accept all these things. And if you want to have a conscience that's clear, you have to understand that telling people a lie is not love. It is not truth to embrace these things, and it's not compassion to lie about what God has said. And it certainly isn't going to do you any good as a Christian to compromise your beliefs in order to make someone else feel better. And so, conscience is the third one. So, we've got reverence, fear of God, identity. What does God say about who I am and who other people are? Conscience, meaning you don't compromise just to please other people. And the last one is influence. That means, how are you influencing others, and how are others influencing you? And this is a big one because of the time we live in right now with social media, and you're constantly being bombarded with information, um, including people who say they're Christians, and they're telling you how to evaluate these issues, this particular girl sports issues, for example. And you have to look at whether that person is influencing you in a biblical way, or they're influencing you in a worldly way. And many Christians are influencing in a way that I think is very worldly. James Tallarico, for example, on these issues, he's, I think, completely compromised, um, and talks about these issues as if we're supposed to go along with the world. But I think the more you speak, if you sound more like Hollywood, if you sound more like, people who don't believe in God, then you have to evaluate what you think. Um, because those people aren't coming from a biblical perspective most of the time. And so you have to evaluate your influence and how you're influencing other people, and whether your influence is leading other people to Christ, um, and to truth, or not. And so there's a huge breakdown here, a huge breakdown of all of this, a larger, deeper breakdown. You can go to witness.keishatonirussell.com. It's my maiden name. And you can hear all of this on, you can see that on the website, and you can actually see full video where I break all of this down. It's about 20 minutes long, and it's the framework that I use as a constitutional lawyer or Christian when I'm evaluating some of these really deep issues. And sometimes there isn't a clear answer in the Bible for some of this stuff. Now, I believe these LGBTQ issues are pretty clear in the Bible, but sometimes the answers aren't that clear. And I think this framework really helps keep me grounded and get me back to what God says on these issues. So witness.keishatonirussell.com for more. And if you made it all to the way to the end, thanks for joining me. See you next time.